Tape number 7, interview with Mr. Larry Pick, December the 8th, 1996. Where did you go from Kaiserwald?
Kaiserwald was dissolved in 2 large transports in the early fall of 1944. We were marched to the pier. The pier was very disorganized. We could have escaped at that time. The Russians were close, and I think some Latvian Jews escaped. I'm not sure. And we were put on a freighter on the bottom of the freighter where the cargo usually is. Up on the upper deck were German civilians who were army employees, Germans, some Latvian Nazis, I guess. We were in the hull of the ship. We had 2 or 3 buckets for facilities which overflowed very fast. Thanks God it didn't last, maybe the trip lasted only 2 days or so. Otherwise, I don't know whether anybody died on that trip or not.
Were you men and women?
Not together, not in the same hull, but on the same ship, I think. I think the women were above us. There was like 4 different levels on that ship. Once in a while, they opened up a little bit and fresh air came in. There was an opening through the gangway or whatever it was. And we arrived in Danzig. Gdansk is a Polish name. Half that. We arrived, and I remember seeing a lot of rocks. And I saw my mother, and I spoke to my mother. In other words, men and women could speak to each other until a German SS officer came and saw us talking to each other and said, "Who is here in charge?" And the fellow who was the last camp elder, he says, "Ich bin, I'm in charge." He said to him in German, "Du bist der Erste, der fällt." You will be the first one I do away with. Well, men and women were separated, of course, and we went on barges. It was like a canal, like a sea, I don't know, Masurischen Seen. We went from Danzig to Stutthof. Stutthof was a camp where all kinds of people were. Real political prisoners, the Norwegian police, Jehovah's Witnesses. Later on, the Italian consul, the consul of Italy, whomever. There was a so-called Ehrencamp, honor camp, where people got food, where people got treated in a halfway humane way.
Why?
Well, because he was the consul of China.
I see.
Or they were, or the Norwegian police got Red Cross packages, which we never got. We were in the separate camp, the Jewish camp, which was the worst one.
Jehovah's Witnesses were in a separate camp?
Jehovah's Witnesses, no, the Jews were in a separate camp.
Yeah, and the Jehovah's Witnesses?
The Jehovah's Witnesses were amongst us, but they had jobs. They had jobs which kept them inside the barrack or where they got enough food. The Jehovah's Witnesses were the only ones, Jews, Catholics, Protestants, who always, the ones I met, remained human beings, decent. At one time, I remember in Stutthof, 10 people or so got together to pray, and a Jehovah's Witness saw it and called them inside the barrack and gave them some bread.
You mean they were having a minyan?
Well,
They were Jews that were praying.
They were Jews were praying. Yeah, they were having a minyan.
Openly? You couldn't have
Against the wall, no, it wasn't. I mean, against the wall of the barrack, and he saw it or heard it. Otherwise, in Stutthof, we were always freezing. We didn't have enough food. We had very thin prisoner clothing. It was very poor material. We built what was so-called, we built a wall, what is 2 or 3 people would stand against the barrack, and 3 other ones would come against them and push against them. So the body warmth would keep each other warm, and then more and more and more until, the body warmth would keep us warm. There was work, but unnecessary work again. We were taken outside camp and taken earth from here to there. The women was even done, I think, with spoons. They had to carry the earth. I was there approximately 2 months. Kaiser Stutthof was in the distance. You always heard shooting. I don't know whether there were actual shooting or whether it was a recording to intimidate us. We always heard that shooting. Once I worked very close to crematorium, and the prisoners who worked at the crematorium, they wore red caps, and the rumor went after every 3 months they were done away with and new ones came. They actually burned the corpses. There was only one hanging there while I was there. It was somebody had done who was either not 16 or not 18 years old. And they waited until there was a law, a German law, that nobody could be hung under 16 or 18. He was not Jewish. They waited until his birthday and hanging on that day. And I remember that because behind me stood one of those professional criminals, and he yelled, "Streck da vorne nicht so die Hälse, wir da hinten wollen auch was sein. Don't stretch your necks out so far. We in the rear also want to see something, want to observe it, watch it."
How
We
large was Stutthof?
How large?
Yeah, the camp.
It's hard for me to say, but it was a large camp.
And was it also wired and fenced?
It was wired, it was fenced, it had guard towers. The people who tried to assassinate Hitler in July 1944, that was near Stutthof. They were taken, they were found out, they were taken from the spot of where they tried to assassinate him to Stutthof. And from there, I think, to Berlin or so, that they were killed. But Stutthof was a camp with all kinds of inmates.
And what was your job there?
I had no official job, worthwhile job. The job was carrying that earth, running back and forth and being beaten by so-called Polish prisoners. My memory, in a way, thanks God, is fading, because in Polish, they always beat us and said schneller, schneller in Polish, and I forgot the word. It was like Rischli or something, really. I forgot the word, which is good. And
What were the barracks like?
the barracks were much better than in Kaiserwald or in Salaspils. I think there were 3 or 4 tiers only. It was not as bad as such as in Salaspils. I mean,
What did people talk about in the evenings if you were
in the evenings,
or at night?
we were
or when-
fantasizing. I was fantasizing.
What did you think?
I was fantasizing. Next to me in Salaspils was a middle-aged man. And I always asked him, please, to tell me again and again and again how he lived in Vienna, that he went to the Coffee House and his children, whatever they did, I forgot. It was to me like, there is a fairy tale in German, Schlaraffenland. The fairy tale, I don't think it's in English, where you sit and the food is brought to you and put it to you. I mean, you don't have to do any work. It was to me like a fairy tale, he talked. It was something which I could only dream of.
And in the other camps, what did people?
What did people talk? Whether they had a piece of potato in the soup.
Was always about food.
That was always about food.
Mm-hmm.
For not so much in the ghetto,
Mm-hmm.
but in Kaiserwald, in Salaspils,
Yeah.
of course. Kaiserwald, we got enough not to starve to death and not enough to live on.
Mm-hmm. Did people ever laugh in these camps?
Salaspils made me forget how to laugh.
When did they? When did you leave Stuttgart?
We were on the so-called Transport M. I again was in the files as an electrician. We left Stutthof in the early fall of 1944 on a transport of approximately 400 or 500 people, many all Jews. Maybe they were less, maybe 300. A friend of mine was a welder whom I had worked with at SSY Rocks. He was with me. I was the electrician. And we were sent to Stutthof. I don't know anymore whether we went by cattle cars. I think they were cattle cars.
To Stuttgart?
To Magdeburg. Magdeburg was an outside camp of Buchenwalde. My number was 96,342. I was never inside Buchenwalde. I should also mention that when I first got to Stutthof, having that low number, relatively low number, 3693, I was almost respectfully treated by other inmates, because the lower your number, that means the earlier you were imprisoned, and the more you went through, and the more you were an elder statesman practically. Okay, but then they found out very fast, within a day or two, that everybody had a low number. That Kaiserwald was a small camp, so that pleasure didn't last very long. We were sent to Magdeburg to a factory. The name was Polde. Polde was a factory which manufactured pots and pans before the war, and that was now a munition factory making munitions. My job was partly, first I worked on a machine. If you remember the movie Charlie Chaplin, Modern Times, he stands on such a machine and he has to tighten nuts or something. And whenever he couldn't do it fast enough and tighten the nut, the foreman would berate him. I was on a machine like this, which always went into the circle. I had to take a half-finished shell out of the card, put it on a mold. It then would come down. The machine would come down and press it, elongate it, make it longer, and it would always go around in circles. Now, if I wasn't fast enough or got tired and didn't put a shell on, the sound was different. There was no shell to push down, so I better made sure this didn't happen too often. We were hungry, very hungry, in Magdeburg.
Were living conditions different?
We were in barracks, but not the high tiers. We were, I think, just two on top of each other. We worked 12 hours. The food was completely insufficient. There was one fellow in my shift who really looked like a skeleton bones. I mean, if you really look like a skeleton, you see on a medicine bottle. And one day, I went to a cabinet to get out some tool or something, and I saw a pot of mashed potatoes there. It's like Fata Morgana. And I wanted to put my hand in when he came up to me and said, no, those potatoes are for him. And that woman, pointing at a woman standing further away, a middle-aged German woman, she always leaves it for him every day, or mostly every day. And the woman, she could have been punished severely. Now that indicated to me, yes, it was, she felt sorry for me, but what could she do? And I felt badly too, but it was his potatoes.
In the course of going from one camp to another, and you've certainly covered a lot of geographical territory, were there people that were with you all the time, or people that you knew from one place and the other?
From the ghetto in Kaiserwald, Riga, and Stutthof, yes, my friend Heinz Biermann, who lives now in Chicago.
And did your mother, was your mother with you in?
No, my mother stayed behind. The last time I saw her through a fence, she indicated to the woman, an SS woman, that asked whether she could talk to me, and the woman looked at her and let her speak to me. My mother had in her hand a white piece of clothing. I don't know whether it was a handkerchief or it was a pair of panties, which she waved like she wanted to try it. I don't think my mother at that time had all her mental faculties left. That's the last time I saw my mother.
This in Stutthof.
That was in Stutthof.
And how
She
aware?
was killed, my mother, in Stutthof.
You knew
She
that.
died.
Yeah.
I knew I had her date wrong by survivors, but I have the official report from the German archives. She got killed on December 30th, and I understand the SS on the 31st, on New Year's Eve, made a big pyre and put everything aflame for New Year's Eve.
How aware were you that the war was coming to an end when you were in Magdeburg?
We were very much aware of it because there were more and more air raids, and the last air raid over Magdeburg was a very severe one. And since that air raid, there was hardly any electricity, and the factory never worked enough anymore. So we were sent out on work details to erect barricades for the approaching Allies. We had to go into burned out houses, take everything which was movable, beams, iron beams or whatever it was, and put it across the road. In one house, I remember, in the cellar, I found some potatoes which had burned, burnt from the fire from the building when the building was aflame. And I ate the potatoes. They were good. I survived. And at least for months I had enough to eat.
What kept you going in all of this time?
The hope to get out.
In each one of these camps?
In each one of these camps. You are looking back and you say, how could, I look back myself, how could you? I mean, if you say to me today, you have to go through all that again, but you are sure you get out, I wouldn't want to do it. Even if I know I get out. But we are in Magdeburg, and the troops, the Russians, Americans were approaching actually. And we had learned from some leaflets which Allied airplanes had dropped, which we were permitted under punishment of death. We weren't permitted to pick it up, but we glanced at it, and we knew that if the the signal that there is air attack, instead of going E, if it would go 3 or 5 times, yeah, that would mean that the enemy is very close and you can drop everything. Well, there was an air attack, and the German SS took us to a cemetery, and suddenly the first blast went off, and I said to myself, it only would be more than one blast, and Dacke, yes, there were the 3 or 5 blasts, and the rest SS just ran off and left us in the cemetery. My friend Heinz and I, we walked away, and there people looked at us. One woman said, "Look, it's now they set the prisoners free already," and one young, maybe 16-year-old, was running around. I mean, there was his dream house of Hitler falling apart with a revolver in his hand, and we are afraid that what a nut might do might kill us yet now. So stupidly, we went back. We didn't know where to go. Went back to camp. In camp, there were other prisoners, former prisoners, because now we were officially free. We broke into the kitchen of the SS. I liberated, that's camp language, liberate means I stole one of the canteens where the army kept their food, their soup or whatever, and stole some whatever you could steal, whatever food was left, raspberry or strawberry jam, and I had that. And we were in that, again, our old camp for one night or two, just waiting for the Americans to overrun the camp, when suddenly the German SS and very few SS, mostly Germans whom they had they didn't have enough uniforms, they just put a band around them. They came with rifles and with shovels and marched us out of the camp. There was one guard for every 7, because I counted it. By that time, I mean, liberation was very close. We were marched towards direction east, and the shovels, we were afraid, we knew what they could be used for. And my friend Heinz and I said we tried to escape at the first opportunity, and whoever couldn't walk anymore, they shot. But either they got tired of shooting, wasting so much ammunition, or whatever it was, they let us rest at an open field. Whether it was prearranged or not, I don't know to this day. Over us circled an airplane, and suddenly there was a tremendous explosion. I don't know whether that airplane dropped a bomb, mistook us for German soldiers, or whether it was all prearranged and it was a minefield and we were just somebody lit a match or so. And I had that can with that jam, that red jam in my hand, and the fellow not far from me, his whole body burst into parts and flew around. And I dropped my jam because I didn't know anymore whether it was part of his brain or whether it was my jam. I just dropped it, and Heinz Beermann and I, we ran. Other people ran. They shot after us, like in a movie. We went in zigzags, so we wouldn't be a good target, and fell down. And it was woods nearby, and we went to the woods. And we ran, and we ran, and we ran. And we found another fellow prisoner who also had escaped. And the 3 of us, we found potatoes, seed potatoes in the field, and asparagus, which the farmers, the potatoes they were just sown, but the asparagus were ready to be picked, and every time when springtime comes and I see asparagus, I remember that time. Don't ask me where we got a match from. We made a fire, and we ate potatoes, and we ate the asparagus. I don't know how we cooked them. I don't
Were
know.
there other people in the woods?
There were other people, but we never knew us, and we kept away from them. Yeah, we didn't know whether they were Germans or whatever they were until we were now between two fronts, between the German front and the Russian front.
Were you identifiable as Jewish prisoners?
Yes, we had the prisoner uniform. We were bald. I mean, our hair was shorn. We were very gaunt, very skinny. We were fear in our eyes, I'm sure. We were stopped by a Russian patrol, and we made them to understand that we are Jews. And for Russians, that's no nationality. Either you were a Czech, or you were a Pole, or you were Italian. A Jew didn't count. And there was an officer, and that officer sent the soldiers away, and he started to speak Yiddish to us. Obviously, the Russian soldier was a Jew. He, on a piece of paper, which I still have, he asked for our names, and he put something down in Russian. And whenever we were stopped and showed that piece of paper to Russian patrols or Russian army people, we could pass, or we let go. We walked and walked and walked, because suddenly nobody told us anymore we have to walk to the left or the right. We just could walk at our own free will. And finally, we found a horse in the woods. It was a nice horse, a good-looking horse. The other two fellows were with me. One came from a smaller town, and he was much more familiar how to dig up asparagus and how to handle a horse and all those things. I didn't. We exchanged that horse with a German farmer for some bread, and I guess jam too. And we got tired walking, and knocked on the door of other German farmer, and he took us in. And there we stayed for 1 or 2 days.
Did they know you were Jews?
Yes. At that time,
Didn't matter.
at that time they wanted to be on the good side of the Jews. Well, we found out later his son-in-law had deserted that night too and came to him. He was in another room. We slept up on the haystack together with 4 Jewish women. And when we woke up in the morning, there were white bed sheets hanging out of all the houses. In other words, the Russians had occupied the city, the town, the village, and the Germans had surrendered. And now, the day we had dreamed of arrived. It was a little different than I had pictured it. But we were a little afraid of the Russians, because they promptly, one of them raped one of those women. Although they were nothing to look at, I mean, with that prisoner clothing. I should also mention that by that time we had gotten rid of the prisoner clothing. We found some civilian clothing on the street, which we put on, where I promptly got a rash from. Yeah. And we stayed with that farmer for 4 or 5 days. When we decided that we would go on. On means my friend from Cologne would go to Cologne, and I would go back to Brunner and to Vienna.
I'm going to change our tape again.